big bus.
I don't know where we are, so I'm just going to say 22. What do you mean there's a sign seat? I know.
One again.
Here we go.
Are you excited for the tour? Yeah. Oh, guys, let's enjoy this beautiful rainy morning. Maybe we'll see a little sun later. Let me introduce you first of all our driver, Yang Lee. Okay, so good morning, Yang Lee. And our terrific local guide here, our friend Darren. You're gonna love this guy. And so I was gonna tell you, even though we've got a city chart, look at how many.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren, D-A-R-R-E-N, and I will be your local guide for your first day here in Singapore. Darren, yes, D-A-R-R-E-N. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Singapore. Show of hands. How many of you, this is your first time in Singapore? Well, okay, let me ask the other question. Right, how many of you know you have been to Singapore before? Okay, so some of you, a quarter of this group. All right, no matter whether it's you've been to Singapore or it's your first time, even for those who have been to Singapore, you realize that Singapore has changed quite a lot, right? So Singapore is growing quite a lot, right? So what are we going to be doing today, right? So over the next few hours, we are going to be exploring Singapore's history, our culture, and our modern development through a few different districts that we'll be exploring, right? So we'll start off first with our civic district. Civic district is where the big, old, grand government buildings are, as the name suggests, civic district. Right, we will be taking about an hour's walk along the Singapore River, and so you can see it is still drizzling a bit. So I would like everyone to make sure you bring along your umbrella. For those with no umbrellas, you didn't bring it out. There are some umbrellas in front that you can grab before you leave the bus. Right, so we start off with the civic district. We'll walk along the Singapore River towards Clarke Quay. Clarke Quay, and that's where we'll be boarding the boat to go down to Marina Bay. Marina Bay is perhaps the most famous district in Singapore today, which is it's the area where you find the three towers with what looks like a boat on top. Right, so yeah, for those who have been to Singapore, maybe yesterday or the day before, right, you might have seen Marina Bay. Right, that is Clarke Quay. After the boat trip, we will be heading down to Chinatown, and we'll be heading to a public housing estate, the projects, if you will. You might be thinking, why are we heading to the projects while in Singapore? That's because 80% of Singapore population lives in public housing. So for you to really understand life in Singapore, right, public housing is a great place to go. This also happens to be the world's tallest public housing blocks. So 50 floors at the top, great views you'll get over the entire island of Singapore. And then we'll be heading to lunch, in the direction of lunch towards the east part of Singapore, where you have a Peranakan, traditional Peranakan, which is a very unique hybrid subculture of Singapore. Peranakan, you meet a Peranakan man by the name of Alvin, you go to his house and you enjoy a private dining experience at his house/museum over there. Right, and then after that we'll be heading back to the hotel. We'll be back by about 2 to 2:30 p.m. and you have the rest of the afternoon on your own. Right, for now. Okay, here you go. This map over here. Alright. Give me a while while I pick up my prize.
No. It's okay. It'll dry.
Okay,
It'll
so
dry
this here shows you, thank you very much. Lovely little spoon here. So this area here, this map here shows you the area that Singapore is in. Right, so you have Singapore, a little red dot in the middle, Malaysia, southern Thailand, and the Indonesian islands of Sumatra and Java. So 200 years ago, the Dutch East India Trading Company and the British East India Trading Company were both fighting for control over trade routes in Southeast Asia. The British had the trading ports of Penang and Bencoolen, and Raffles, this is Raffles who was stationed in Bencoolen. But the Dutch had the better located ports of Malacca and Batavia, which is Jakarta, capital of Indonesia today. Now, the British knew
that if they wanted to beat the Dutch in the trading game, they had to get a port in between both Dutch ports, somewhere around here. At the same time, this stretch of water, the Straits of Malacca, were really important because that's where trade routes from Europe and India, from China, and from the Spice Islands had to pass through if they wanted to trade between any of these two regions. Meanwhile, now let me bring in the Sultan, or the King. Let me find the King. Yes, this is the King over here. This Sultan controlled the Johor Sultanate, which controlled Singapore. Now every king deserves a crown, so I have here a crown for him as well. Now this king, he had 2 wives.
Wow.
1 spouse is enough, 2 spouses, something's gonna happen. Something did happen. Because from his first wife, he had 1 son, the older brother. From his second wife, he had a second son from his second wife. In the year 1812, the older brother was away in northern Malaya getting married to a Malayan princess. Unfortunately, while he was there, his father died, leaving the crown hanging. What happens next?
The younger brother took over.
The younger brother, of course, I mean, there are only 3 characters in the story, right? So it's not going to be Raffles now. So it was the younger brother who swoops in, grabs the crown, and proclaimed himself as the Sultan of Johor Sultanate and Singapore. This whole time, the older brother was unaware of the proceedings. He comes back to the palace grounds, he realizes that, whoops, my dad is dead, my younger brother is now Sultan. The younger brother then proceeded to kick the older brother into exile in present-day Indonesia. Perhaps his gravest mistake. He should have just ended it all. Now let's bring Raffles back into the story. When Raffles heard of this political fight, he was like, aha, this is a chance we can use to get a trading port somewhere here. What he did was, he sailed up to where the older brother was in exile, and he made a deal with him. He said, if we, the British, install you as the true rightful Sultan of the Johor Sultanate, will you sign over the Singapore River, which is just 300 feet behind us? Will you sign over the Singapore River over to the British to set a trading post? Well, guess what he said? Yes, of course, I'm in exile. I have no money, I have no power, I have no status. Give me what I want, I'll give you what you want. That was exactly what they did. They brought him back to the palace grounds using military might. They kicked the younger brother out into exile this time. And they proclaimed the older brother as the true rightful Sultan of the Johor Sultanate. And that was how, 205 years ago, Singapore River, right behind us, became a British trading port. 5 years later, in 1824, which is exactly 200 years ago, the British and the Dutch shook hands and they drew a line down Southeast Asia, down the Straits of Malacca. Everything south then on became Dutch, everything north became British. Malacca and Bencoolen swapped sides, and this 200 years ago was the formation of modern day Southeast Asia. Everything south eventually became Indonesia, everything north eventually became Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. And that is the story of how Singapore was colonized.